I think I'll just go ahead and start. So it is my big pleasure to welcome Andrew Brose into the room today. And maybe just to mention what a fortuitous situation this is, because as a second year studio, we've been dealing with a play school project in observatory, and on our site visit, Andrew happened to be there, which has sparked us being able to have this conversation today about your sort of long trajectory of working with education spaces across pre-primary, primary to secondary, tertiary. And so I just want to say what a pleasure it is and an honor for us to have you speak here. Thank you very much for coming. And I'll leave it over to you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is this one next? Cheers. Yeah, so Megan asked me to put this together last week now. So I've put together a number of projects which I've worked on. I've kind of broken this presentation into two sections. The first is a bit of mass background for those of you who don't know the model of architecture serving society. A 15-year-old architecture design firm, which I've worked for the last 13 years. I was full-time in Rwanda for several years, and then started a studio for them here a while back. So I'm going to give a kind of a high level to mass, and then we're going to jump into three projects which I worked on, education projects which I worked on very closely. All the projects, majority of the projects you'll see today are from East Africa, Southern Africa as well. Again, these are a lot of the work I had done full-time as a designer, as an architect at Mass, was in Central, East, and Southern Africa. And so I'm going to focus on a lot of that today. But I wanted to title this presentation E is for education, but E is also for environment. And we'll get into that a little bit more. I was thinking, again, about many of you who were working on this ECD project in observatory. I'm a resident of observatory. Just rode my bike up the hill. So I know the space, but I also am passionate as a father and as someone who's worked on educational projects on primary and pre-primary design. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the thematic rationale behind some of the design of these projects. I will try to leave 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions, but if I'm rambling or taking too much time, just please give me a shout. Okay, so many of you may know the firm, some of you may not. MASS is a mission-driven organization, believes that design is never neutral, it can either hurt or it can heal. And so the organization uses research, building, advocacy, for architecture that promotes justice and human dignity. How we show that, how the organization represents that, is different for each project. What this really means is there's not kind of a big A architect in front of each project. A lot of times there are strong individuals, there's strong champions of projects. But that the mission of an organization that MASS works for really drives the reason or the intent of the project. Engagement with the people, the end users of the project, is ultimately which results in the design of the project. The organization has grown significantly since it started in 2008. The firm is not only architects, it's also landscape architects, engineers, builders, film team, researchers. So the firm has prided itself on having a range of different disciplines working. The team is spread out across the world. The firm started in Rwanda, in Kigali, in Central Africa in 2008. Has since grown with projects around the world, mostly in Africa, but especially in the last 7 to 8 years, a lot of work in the US with an office in Boston. The organization has really kind of framed itself recognizing that the majority of architecture firms, especially the big A architecture firms, will work from a design brief. They'll take what's prescribed or given to them as the program or the schedule for a project. They'll work from that and hand over a set of construction documents, and their job or the role is done. This is sort of the traditional way, historic way of architects working. MASS has recognized that there's a lot of work that goes into the visioning and planning of design and construction projects, oftentimes with architects and designers not being involved in that process. And so MASS has really invested a lot of time and energy and resources into partnering with organizations before the conversation about a set program, a set site comes into play, so that budgets, site constraints, stakeholders, political advocacy, other constraints are considered before the project begins. Two kind of themes that have really driven the organization over the last several years are these two of performance and provenance. Performance really being around how a building performs in terms of providing impactful, efficient, healthy spaces. The organization has started really working with Dr. Paul Farmer at Partners for Health in public health design. And the health of buildings has really driven a lot of the firm's thinking and design recently, but also in terms of how the building functions in terms of providing spaces which are naturally ventilated, provide natural lighting, and then ultimately how they're built. So provenance is really the handprint of the building. Performance is more about the footprint, what it's doing around the performance is really about how it's impacting the ground, impacting the environment. And provenance is about how it's built. Who is involved in that process? Who's constructing the materials? And a lot of times we use not only ICE indexes, but our own indices to think about how materials are created, fabricated, and used on a building project. These are two kind of metrics we use within the organization to measure the outcomes of a project. I'm going to kind of move through several examples. These are all education or education-adjacent projects. Many of them you may recognize. Some of them have been built and have been used for a long time. Others are somewhat new. I'm going to speak through these. Please, if you guys have questions about these as I'm going, please don't hesitate in raising your hand. The first one I want to speak to is the Active Leadership University. The firm had the pleasure and great privilege to work with Fred Spenneker, who started the Active Leadership University and the Active Leadership Academy. Many of you may know the Academy in Johannesburg. And this was their first campus built in Central Africa. They also have a campus in Mauritius. And this project was really exciting as a way to rethink tertiary education spaces. How students might learn not only classroom, but also how they might learn from engagement, from one-on-one, from group. And so the design of the building really took the scale of an individual, a small group, a large group, and classroom to think about how spaces can be flexible, how they can adapt to different types of learning environments and different types of engagement, one-on-one or group. The project is on a hillside outside Kigali, or within the industrial complex in Kigali, and it takes advantage of the terraced landscape, both in terms of the water drainage, but also in the programmatic flow down the hillside, and then really uses these kind of central cores arranged around the program to give opportunity for these different types of study or different types of individual learning. Next one is the Rwanda Institute of Conservation Agriculture. This is a project that really started in 2015 and was completed about 2020. And this is a very large institute for teaching the next generation of farmers or agricultural innovators within Rwanda. This project is also one where the performance and provenance ideas were really coming to take a strong place within the organization. And because of our involvement from early visioning of the project all the way through construction in terms of even managing the construction process, MAS was able to think about every single piece of material. Every block was fabricated on site from earth, clay, and cement. Every piece of wood was tracked from Rwanda, Tanzania, and other locations nearby. And every single laborer was part of the design process in the construction of this institute. There are over 60 different buildings, from teaching rooms and lecture rooms to housing, agricultural innovation spaces, farm equipment spaces. It is on 100 hectares in southern Rwanda, and it was an enormous opportunity for us to think about how can you bring young people together to give them an expect about innovation within a sector which is driving a lot of the country's economy. The University of Global Health Equity is also another tertiary institute. This was a public project with Partners in Health and the University of Global Health Equality, which is a public health institute set up by the Ministry of Health in Rwanda. This is in the north of the country near the border of Uganda. and is connected to a hospital, to Butaro Hospital. So the questions around this project were really how do you connect young nurses, young doctors, young midwives who are training at the hospital and other public health practitioners who are training, connect them to a very rural setting, many of them coming from the capital city, and how do you give them access to not only a teaching institute, but to each other, to learn from each other within this setting and context. I've included the Ellen DeGeneres campus of the Diane Fossey Gorilla Fund. Here, this is an education space. It is not a lecture space or an academic institution, but it is another one which I think embodies a lot of the themes that we're going to talk about today, particularly in its outdoor education environments and its outdoor exhibition spaces. This is a facility which was built in the north around the conservation of gorillas and their natural habitats. The country of Rwanda has put a lot of efforts into preserving the habitat of the mountain gorilla, and has also set up education programs and research programs at this institute. It is really fun we actually worked with the South African Joburg-based graphic design team and exhibit design team to put together a nature walk which moves around the entire campus, not only for the education of gorillas and their habitats, but also the education of the space. So the building itself uses a natural bioswale, an anaerobic backwash reactor to treat all the waste that's generated on site, physical waste. And so that you actually move through the entire building and campus, learning about the gorilla's natural habitat and human impact on the environment, and our opportunity to create better outcomes or a better environment for the wildlife which we coexist with. So the institution was really an opportunity not only for education of wildlife, but for us to think about ways to educate the population and others about how buildings can have positive or negative impact on the environment. The Northwind House or Norskin House is another, just jumping through all the kind of history of Kigali projects with NASA right now. But this is an entrepreneur's entrepreneur and investment space in Kigali. This is actually the old École Belge, or the old Belgium school in Kigali, which was, the school had moved out of the campus, and the firm had the opportunity to rethink these old brick structures, and then building some new off-grid education, entrepreneurship training spaces here. I'm including this one really as an urban example. One I think is really fantastic in terms of its approach of reusing existing spaces, but also there's just some really nice naturally lit buildings at this campus. I'm going to kind of jump over now to some of these examples I wanted to share with you all. As I mentioned, I have worked for the firm for a long time, both in Rwanda and South Africa, and as well as several other East African countries. I've also transitioned as an individual, as a professional. I'm no longer full-time in mass. I'm still consulting on a number of mass design projects, all in sub-Saharan Africa. I still practice as an architect, but I also work in agriculture myself now. I work with farmers in Burundi, and we've started business there. At the same time, I'm also a father, and I've got 2 young kids. And a lot of what we're going to talk about over the next 20 minutes is around young kids and their playing environments. We often talk about schools, and we think about buildings and structures and walls and roofs. So much of how kids learn is outdoors. It's about how they play. And when I talk to my kids after they come home from school, usually they're not telling me about what their teacher did. They're usually telling me about what someone did on the playground. They're telling me about the fun thing that they saw, or when they hurt themselves and they want to show me their skinned knee or their bruised elbow. Kids just like to move, and they want to move, and it's good for them. And a lot of how we design spaces for young pre-primary and primary level students doesn't consider that. And a lot of what I want to talk about over the next, the rest of this presentation is about the environments in which we're creating. So not only is E for education, E is for environment. And I'm going to use this kind of both environment, meaning our immediate physical area, our environment around us, but also the environment which we have responsibility to protect. The wildlife who exists within our cities and within our landscape, but also how we create a more healthy environment for the next generation. So E for environment is something that I want you to all think about, especially as we're talking about play, how children engage with the environment around the buildings we design, and how that environment can interact with the built spaces that we design. We, I think, often are very good at kind of removing the two, having landscape and building separate. But play is really an enormous opportunity for young kids and young children to learn. Unguided, natural play is where innovation and learning can really grow. I just pulled this quote from some childhood education research that we had used in some of these projects. In addition, outdoor environments can help teach assertiveness, social skills, leadership qualities, through role playing in different play spaces. Kids are imaginative. They have fantastic creative abilities. And as much as we can try to continue to teach that in the classroom, they will continue to learn that in outdoor environments. I'm going to talk through 3 projects, which I have been involved in quite a bit on each of these, so I'm happy to answer questions as they come up. And they will consider learning environments in different scales, in different ways, in different methods. And they will also consider our natural environment, how we are stewards of our natural environment. The Mubuga School is a project I worked on over a decade ago. I still think very relevant. And this is, I showed you the Diana Fossey Gorilla Research Institute. A young couple came from Belgium and Germany together, and they were visiting the gorillas. They were tourists to Rwanda, and they asked their driver, if we were to invest in education or education spaces here, what would that look like? And he took them to the primary school that he went to. And he said, here's a school which has crowded classrooms. There is not a playground. This is an opportunity where you could invest if you were interested. And they gave money to the Ministry of Education to invest in that school. We were brought in as a design consultant to think about this. So we stepped back and we said, well, what is Rwanda's education goals? How can we ensure that any school which we work on achieves the basic 9-year education program, meaning grade 1 to grade 9 at that time. So this was back in 2013, 2014. And in Rwanda, in working with the Child Friendly Schools Initiative, which is a UNICEF-based initiative, which was working with the Ministry of Education, thinking about how every child has access to primary and pre-primary education. We began to think about not only design of one school in one place in Rwanda, but how this school could impact future schools across the country. Rwanda is a little bit of a blurry graphic. I'll try to walk through it. But Rwanda is a young democracy, similar kind of history in terms of having gone through an enormous crisis in '94, and then having a democratically elected president in '94, and then rethinking all of its education and health programs since that time. Put into place this basic 9-year education for primary and lower secondary. In addition, it was thinking about how to get every single student into a class. And rather than putting 80 pupils into one classroom, the country decided to have, for primary and pre-primary level, a dual shift program. So you'd have 40 kids come in the morning, go home, 40 kids come in the afternoon. You oftentimes have teacher swaps, but not always. So teachers were often heavily overworked. In addition, languages, maths, and social studies were pushed not only for Kinyarwanda, the national language, but also English and French, and then standardized testing systems, and then an integration of all levels of schools. So similar to how in South Africa we have private, public, and also Model C. In Rwanda, there are private, public, and also public-private hybrids. Often, many times, these are Catholic schools or other faith-based schools, which have then had public, government-paid teachers coming in to teach students. So the government was really thinking holistically, not just how do we implement every school we want to, but how do we work with everyone to ensure every young child has access to education. What we saw is that schools across the country were designed in this 4-yard system. And this is really important to us because we're talking about play, we're talking about environment here. And what this means is that all the young boys, mostly, would come out, get a football, and start playing football. And everyone else who didn't want to play football had nowhere to play. It's a big 4-yard, and it was great for morning lineup, making sure all the pupils are at school, but it really allowed only one type of play to happen. And it meant there were oftentimes small groups of kids who were not playing football, or oftentimes young girls who were not even added to that football group, taking place around the periphery of the campus. So we said, what would it look like to actually interrupt that? How can we create spaces for multiple types of play? Let's ensure there's still a small pitch so that those who want to play football or volleyball can, but how do we ensure that there are multiple different types of play environments at the school? So we took this campus and we bifurcated it with a couple of new different buildings. The buildings kind of on the side and the bottom were existing, and we were adding 2 new buildings in the middle in order to reduce the number of pupils in the classroom. In addition to the rearrangement of the master plan, we were thinking about how do we take this kind of standard sausage-shaped block and break that up to allow for other spaces of learning, other spaces of engagement that are not just classroom-based. How do we ensure that the corridor and transition spaces are just as useful as the classroom-based spaces? And so some very simple things of duplicating that classroom, breaking that bar, bending it, and then grouping buildings together creates not only these outdoor environments that are in relation to each other, but also the secondary spaces which happen when you take 2 rooms and you pull them apart from each other. And those became program spaces. They became spaces for teaching, but they also became spaces for reading, or for meeting, or for parents who were picking up their kids, fetching their kids from school. And so there's opportunities to both program formally some of those spaces and to leave some of those unprogrammed, to allow them to naturally, organically serve whatever purpose they need. This is what that plan ended up being, and a lot of these, we started intentionally designing those outdoor areas. I'm not a landscape architect. Sometimes I wish I was. I think landscape architecture is a profession we don't give enough credit to. But we have a great landscape design team, landscape architecture team, and we spend a lot of time thinking about how the spaces not only ensure different playing activities, but also ensure that the buildings are properly shaded, that we're handling all the rain, water, and stormwater that's on site, and then also thinking about rainwater collection. There was an existing latrine facility or toilet facility, and we're adding a new toilet facility, but having enough water for hand washing was also critically important. And so thinking about rainwater collection on that site became a very, very important part of the program. Many of these things I just walked through, but thinking about play landscapes, safe landscapes, comfort, and then healthy landscapes. This is what I looked like when I was younger. But this is the project in construction. So we spent a lot of time thinking about not only how this is going to just be designed, but how it's going to get built. And a lot of this was, I love material technologies, and so I throw this slide in. This is a concrete column. Concrete has to stay wet for 28, 30 days, and it's wrapped in banana leaves. We had to redo it after a few days, but rather than wrapping in sheeting plastic or on the materials which were expensive and hard to get, we just tried wrapping in banana leaves. There are a lot of things like this about how we think about the farming and agricultural landscape in which we existed. You'll see in some of these photos there's a lot of maize planted nearby, there's a lot of banana planted nearby, and a lot of materials we found to be available, but also thinking about how we incorporate this into some of the landscape. So this is the school down here. You can see these are the original buildings down here in the L shape, and then the new buildings in the middle. Those are the volcanoes in the background. I showed you the photos of the Gorilla Research Institute. Those are up there below Muhabura, below the volcano. And this is really a building within the valley, serving this small community. Also just a very gorgeous area of the world. So this is what it looks like when it's built. Architecturally, it's not the most amazing, but I think the landscape and how it engages with the landscape and engages with the campus are something that I'm very proud of. As I mentioned, maize and other farm activities happening nearby the school. Old buildings on the left, new building on the right, some of the sports equipment and some of the balance beams. Little things that really thought about how do kids engage in their natural landscape. Papyrus and some of the wetlands, rainwater drainage, thinking about how do we not only capture all the rainwater and put it somewhere else, but how can we also encourage growth of water constrained and also water harvesting species of plants? How do we ensure that kids have an opportunity to think about the natural world around them? And then also bringing as much natural light into the classroom as possible. Something I do want to mention with this slide is the other thing about classrooms that often happen is classrooms are designed for one size of students. And then you look at a kid who's maybe 4 years old in grade R, and then you look at a kid who's 9, 10, or 11. And they're massively different, but we have put furniture into the classroom for one size. As we designed custom furniture for each classroom, we thought about window height and how kids can have access to outdoors, or visual connection to the outdoors based on window height, based on perspective and shape. Trying to bring some of nature back into the building with a higher ceiling. And then doing simple things like blue gum mazes. Very, very simple little structure. One of the most fun things to design. Kids with this, I mean, you get a tall kid who's looking over the top of it, looking at a little kid who's hiding behind. Play is a fantastic thing to design for. You can't always design it properly, but when you have the opportunity to put something in place and watch kids engage with it, I think that is one of the greatest things you can do as a designer and as an architect. I'm going to speak about this next project, which is the Ilima Primary School. This is a school which was one of 3 that we were asked to look at with the Africa Wildlife Foundation. The Africa Wildlife Foundation was working in wildlife conservation and wildlife corridor preservation in DRC, Tanzania, and Zambia. And within each of those wildlife corridors exists a school. So wildlife corridors, as you may know, are migratory corridors for elephants, for giraffes, for wildebeest, as they move seasonally from one grazing area to another. Humans and populations have, as we've grown, have started to move into those wildlife corridors. As cities have grown, we've started to push into those wildlife corridors. And so the African Wildlife Foundation was thinking about how do we ensure that communities who are existing within that are able to protect wildlife, but also understand what it means, especially for rural communities who might be harvesting or shooting wildlife. So this was a project in a very, very remote part of DRC. And the whole premise of the project was how do we bring in a wildlife conservation curriculum while also having a conversation about a school existing within the Bonobo Wildlife Corridor. I'm going to play this really short little video because I think it gives a little bit of premise to the project. That might give you a little bit of an idea of the context of this project. And I think one of the reasons this project was instrumental to us as an organization is because of its remoteness. We had to think about every single piece of wood, every single brick, and where it was coming from. There was Kinshasa way down here in this southwest. We could bring some materials by barge from Kinshasa, but that was expensive. It took a long time. So the majority of materials we brought had to be done by bicycle. or carried by hand. And so we were really constrained in terms of transport, what we could use for the project. As I mentioned, this project was really one around conservation education curriculum, which African Wildlife had developed this curriculum for the schools. And it was one about how do you continue to create conservation agriculture while preserving certain ecologies. And the school, very simply, was an opportunity to span between those two things. How do you ensure that the school will continue to raise the next generation of young Congolese, and also ensure that we're thinking about ecology and preservation long term in a natural wildlife environment. It's a pretty basic partie. There's these two U's that come together. One side of it is farmed, educational, agricultural space. The other is forest. And how do we kind of use, again, that outdoor environment to influence or push the design of that project, design of that program? At the same time, looking at the resources and materials we have available to physically build the school. A lot of the project is about, as I'm just mentioning with Mbuga, it's about this child scale of a project, of the building, but also thinking about how do we introduce light, color, with very limited materials, with a very limited palette. And the handprint that Provenance I spoke about earlier really showed up on this project because everything had to be hand-built and handmade on site. This is the school in construction. Everything was, all the walls were adobe earth block load-bearing walls, about 40 centimeters to 50 centimeters wide, with buttresses along the corridor to provide support where the trusses rested. Wood columns, wood trusses, and then a wood shingle roof. So this again was pushing us to really think about material, how to look at longevity, ensure that if there was something that broke or wore down, that the carpenters and masons who were involved in the project had the resources they need to fix it and repair it. Here's that same image, but completed and finished. The classrooms themselves are behind these screens, which pivot on a bicycle hub. And they each open up to allow light into the classroom, but also to open up out to those two different environments, agricultural and ecology, that I showed you earlier. The school itself is quite large within the forest. There's not much around at this scale. And so it is very eye-catching when you're driving or walking down the path in the Bandundu forest. And it was an enormous opportunity for us to engage with students to think about the kinds of spaces they appreciate or wanted in the school, but also to think about how this building could ensure that kids are learning not only about the ecology, but also from their curriculum program, but also from the building itself. So I've spoken a bit about how the landscape can inform education of students, but we also want to ensure that students are asking questions in the buildings that they're in. And to create or elicit exploration or curiosity should always be something we're striving for. So I just love ending with drone photos, so indulge me. This is the road that's passing through. This is the school. Here we have the agricultural plots, and then teacher housing, which was under construction at the time, and then this forest, which is a wildlife corridor for those bonobo monkeys. So the school really spanning between those two different landscapes. The last one, which I'll speak about, is really one around scale. And again, I mentioned with Mbuga primary schools in Rwanda, a need to think about schools long term and how we can create a model or a prototype that can be used in multiple contexts. For Manika land in the UNAPS project we did in Zim, this is one around looking at how we can ensure resiliency of several different schools which have been affected by Cyclone Idai in 2017, 2018, which caused enormous landslides and damaged several health centers and schools. We received a commission from UNOPS, who was reconstructing lots of roads and infrastructure, to design a reconstruction program for 12 schools and 5 different health centers. As I mentioned, Cyclone Idai caused enormous damage. It killed dozens of people through landslides, through flooding, and this is what happens when we think about environmental changes. When we think about global warming, we have more traumatic events. So again, thinking about environment, how our buildings can not only reduce our impact, our global footprint, our embodied carbon, but also how our buildings can be more resilient, especially for our young generation, our young people. So the impetus for this project is really one around how do we design a prototypical primary school and maternity clinic, which can be replicated and reconstructed with damaged facilities across diverse contexts. This was really in Manicaland province in Zim, so thinking about that context specifically, but also thinking more holistically about how school buildings themselves, how can we design better policies and better programs which can be replicated in other contexts. This is a project we did with Enle architects. I don't know if many of you have read or seen Kunle Adeyemi's work. Some fantastic work in Nigeria with the Makako Floating School and other projects he's done since. So this is a collaboration between MAS and Enle working directly with UNOPS in Zimbabwe. I mentioned the mission for this project, but again, learning through play, learning through nature, replicating, creating replicability for disaster-prone areas were really the three themes or three impetus we were working with for the design of these school projects. As I mentioned, there were several different school contexts and school sites we had to think about. So what we did is we worked with one. We started with Kushinga Secondary School and Kushinga Primary and Secondary School, and then looked at all the different sites and thought about how can we create a classroom block and a landscape context, which can be replicated across multiple different contexts or multiple different sites. Many of which had been demolished through landslides or through flooding. And so we had to think a lot of this project was around water diversion, water collection, and then also access. So what does it mean if kids are in school and there's suddenly a flash flood or there's suddenly torrential rain? And so a lot of the project was also thinking about how to create safe campuses for young kids. This is the design as it came out. So we had some existing classrooms on the side. And this block, you can see there's essentially a primary grade 1, 2, 3, 4 block, and then this ECD block. This again was designed to be constructed with fired earth brick. And then it's, again, a very simple strategy of taking 2 classroom blocks, thinking about that middle space, and how to create additional learning and teaching spaces, but then creating a campus between each of those blocks. The classroom block itself really framing these play environments in the middle, and then the ECD block having a lot more tertiary or additional play areas that are nested within it. As I spoke about and have been speaking about, learning through play is very, very critical and very important. We've looked at a lot of different precedents. We've looked at a lot of different examples of how young students learn in their outdoor natural environments, in outside the classrooms, how we can create different methods of learning and different methods of play outside the classroom block. The block itself, as I've spoken about, want to look specifically at the ECD block. The reason I show this here, I mean, this is not the most exciting architectural drawing here, but how we create flexibility within a block is really important. So those of you who are working on ECD design, early childhood schools, think about how teachers can ensure that multiple types of learning can take place. Having students learn together in 3 or 4 groups of 3 or 4, but then also the ability to move those tables aside and have big group play or big group activity or even nap time. How do you ensure that the block itself can allow for different function within that? As you get older, you can have more laboratory, more formal education space, and even more lecture type spaces. But really the ECD block, we found big open spaces and flexibility, maximizing that as much as possible. As I said, the design of the campus itself was really hinged around this terraced pathway, and then these play spaces between each grouping of classroom blocks. As I spoke about, we had to think about a campus which could be replicated. Some schools needing just 1 or 2 new classroom blocks, others needing 6 or 7. So looking at a pairing of blocks, which then could be tessellated or arrayed across the site in a fairly basic method. And this kind of geometric pattern allowed us to nest blocks against each other, and then they could be used and replicated fairly easy without a lot of additional work to repeat that pattern across the site. So in addition to the design construction drawings we did, we put together this adaptation report, which ultimately outlined every decision we had made, but then also looking at different ways to design structure based on the results or findings from different soils, bearing capacity, and then looking at the architectural technique or tectonics of the project to explain it more informally. I found these kinds of drawings to be incredibly helpful as an architect. We like to do these and these a lot, which are very helpful, our flat 2D drawings. These I have found to be incredibly beneficial when presenting the reason or rationale behind a project. Why do we choose to put concrete inside of brick? Why do we choose to put a truss a certain way? And explaining things not only through 3-dimensional graphics, but also through these kinds of reports can help someone in an organization understand how it's going to be built, why it's going to be built, and where it's going to be built, and who for. So just to say, kind of, as you all are thinking about how you represent designs, who you're representing them to, it can be enormously beneficial to think about different methods of representation. This is part of that adaptation report, looking at each of these sites. I'm happy to share this with you if you all want to have a look at it. As I mentioned, the school blocks themselves kind of fitting in or nesting into different campuses. Teachers' housing was also part of this project, which I'm not really going over right now, but there was both an educational component as well as a residential component of these programs. And then across these different sites, there's even a few more that are not shown here. And then looking at the school, the number of students who are attending that school, and then making a case for how many new classroom blocks need to be built, where they're to be located. The blue lines showing water management, water collection, harvesting, as well as circulation across the site. So thinking about replicability across multiple environments is one that I think is really, really beneficial on any project you work on. We are so good as architects at looking at one site and iterating over and over and over with that one site. As soon as we start thinking about a building, not only as a block or as an archetype, and then repeating in that in other contexts and other environments, can cause you to question your original decision making or your original thought process. And I encourage you, if you have any design projects, put them on a different site, see how they work, think about what it means, especially for an ECD or a school, how it functions better or worse. As you're looking at different communities, as you're looking at different learning groups, different ages, I think you'll learn more and more as you do that. I'm going to end there.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Yeah.
Can I open up for questions? That's what we have. Okay, we see lots of questions. I see one here, one there. You want to go?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, the city that we're designing for is on a very small site, which
Yep.
seems to be in opposition to these quite large spaces that you guys have. Do you have any advice perhaps for, since there's not a lot of space on our site, I know many people are doing play areas on roofs or on a different level. Do you have any advice for planning play and letting them run through play, but on such a small sort of roofscape?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was thinking about this as I was putting this together. I recognize they're all fairly large open plans, and you're dealing with multiple stories. I think actually one area can be the transition between floors. Like I showed some photos of kids on slides. Like if you think about, I mean, a lot of these are big sites, but the transition across topography is one that we were thinking about on these. And I think in the same way, you can think about the transition between levels. not only just like from top floor to bottom floor, but in terms of like how a kid moves from one room to the next. Are there steps? Are there slides? Are there ropes? Are there climbing structures? And I think you have the opportunity. I was in a shop recently with my daughter, and it was like a kid's shop, and there was an adult door and there was a kid's door, and like she loved that, and she loved that she could walk in like her own size little entrance. And I think those are the opportunities you have for kids to get really excited, but also to express themselves and express their own creativity.
I think my question kind of relates to that little anecdote as well. I was just going to ask about when you think about designing for such a small scale, like a young child.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned like window height and scale of furniture, but what are other things that you would consider important? Like that's really going to, make the kids' lives easier to just move around.
Yeah, I didn't get into it a lot, but I think when I say environment, I mean acoustics and I mean lighting. And I think those are two really, really important aspects. If you have glare on a chalkboard or a whiteboard, kids are not going to be able to see it. And that seems like a really, really basic thing. It should be for any classroom, but especially younger kids. If they can't see what they're supposed to be looking at, they're going to get distracted and look elsewhere. So lighting, not just natural lighting, but also ensuring that lighting is adequate and is supportive of that learning environment. And then acoustics. Young kids love to screech, they love to be loud, and we should allow for that. But also thinking about how do you design spaces which are not just all hard surfaces. So how can you add soft things in either onto the walls or onto the floors? How can we think about reducing the reverberation of noise in a room? I think is really important. You mentioned scale, like that's from furniture to entry to even how a child approaches the instructor at the head of the classroom. I've really appreciated when my kids have had teachers who, rather than sitting themselves behind a desk, have brought themselves as an administrator, as a lecturer, to their height, or even putting themselves close to the kids. So thinking about arranging those things. And obviously teachers are going to have their own priority, but allowing for that kind of flexibility, especially for a teacher who's an ECD, grade R or R teacher, to engage with the kids at their height, at that level.
I have sort of a follow-up question. It's almost in the same realm.
Mm-hmm.
What thoughts do you have around actual volume or spatial volume? Because we're speaking about the skin, the roof, the windows, all of this, but what effect does it have on a child necessarily? Do they sometimes need smaller, lower spaces? What happens when you have a hall where multiple children must engage, where sometimes you might have to have the roof higher? Is there any consideration for like what effect does the volume have in the design of these spaces? And I say this also because we were looking at the Shera Gotha school earlier, which is very specifically for children on the autistic spectrum. So they have different requirements around light. Like you can't have necessarily straight visuals out onto the street because it's distracting. So you have to have light, but it has to be soft. And then it still deals with big volume and small volume because both are needed, but the big volumes get cushioned in a way. So I was just wondering if that's come up in
Yeah, it's a good question, and I wouldn't be able to give the exact technical requirements. I think you've mentioned some of them yourself. So I think the most I can speak to is a lot of the projects I'm showing now have been resource constrained. So any sort of large assembly has mostly taken place outdoors. Also because most of these projects I'm showing are in pretty moderate climates, and so we can do that. The Botha School I think has a fantastic auditorium, right? And they've done a good job with the acoustics there. So yeah, the volume question I think is an important one. I don't know the exact parameters for how to design those spaces, but again, I think I would answer flexibility. So allowing for either partitioning of that space or having what can be an assembly hall then go down into a smaller recreation space or even a classroom space. Especially if you're tight on space, how do you ensure that you could open something up so you could have a lot of people meeting, or you could close it down and have smaller classrooms?
I suppose you're also dealing with volume in many of your projects in a certain way. Like there's a moment where you step from the inside to the outside, and the volume is literally the reach of the sky, which is also an important learning environment.
Yeah. Also transition. Like we were talking about, especially in a tight site, having a transition space from inside to outside with maybe something that's covered or something that's shaded, I think is really important, especially here in Cape Town where we get not as much, but lots of rain. It's important that kids have that.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So I'm interested in your moving to agriculture, and if you think, you've got sort of a number of dimensions, if architecture prepared you for that or it was just circumstantial, and then moving from that is, do you think that our education is preparing us, today, or to students, the pedagogy is preparing people for contemporary? Should we be engaging these kind of things earlier, or should there be a very strong foundational and then the specialization earlier? Mainly an architect's a GP, and you have to do many things, and actually this architecture thing is more complex than a GP. So I'm interested if you could reflect from your own experience and mass, and what do you think could be done that prepares people to be more prepared for the contemporary environment?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I'm going to speak to because the question is about my own experience and professional background. Over the last 3 years at Mass, I was leading all the business development. So I was finding new opportunities with new partners. I was writing proposals. I was putting together a lot of early visioning ideas for projects, what they could be, how much they could cost. Thinking about projects sort of not at risk, but thinking about them enough that we can actually start to think about who needs to be involved, how much money needs to be involved, is it feasible? And that kind of questioning really gave me a lot of understanding of how any sort of project business should think about its feasibility, should think about its future. And I think the business development I was doing at Mass really prepared me for the businesses I'm leading now. Because whether we're looking at a building construction project or whether we're looking at investment into a farm or into an agricultural community, there are inputs and there's context, and then there's outputs and there's cost. And yes, we are trained as sort of a GP or as a jack of all trades in a lot of ways, which I think is beneficial. I think similar to medicine, I think we as architects have opportunities to think about a very specific typology we want to be in, or if we want to be more of a generalist. I think our pedagogy in the architectural profession should allow for that kind of exploration to happen and take place. At the same time, I do think through internships and through job placements, we should be giving young professionals opportunities to explore as much as they can. I think that's something I really appreciated at Mass, is young professionals get an opportunity to try many different things, to push, to say, I'm not into this, I want to try that, I see someone doing this. And giving young professionals and recent graduates the opportunity to learn through experience, but also learn through colleagues, I think is really important. So I think that, to answer your question, I'm not in academia. From what I've seen, I think the curricula and pedagogy is doing what it needs to. I would say the professional industry is not doing what it needs to. I'd say we as owners of practices and of firms are not giving young people, we're not pushing them hard enough, and I don't think we're actually giving them enough opportunity to explore. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So has the Mass model changed through time in relation to things that have...
Absolutely.
But are they radical ruptures?
I think the biggest one I can speak to is the introduction of, we were talking to Megan about this earlier, introduction of training programs like the Africa Design Center and fellowship programs. There was a time when the firm was quite young, and we had a lot of young people who were driven and making things happen and trying things. And then the firm grew. Like I showed you, at one point the firm was quite large, and we saw an enormous opportunity to bring in young designers, young practitioners, but a lot of the young practitioners who were coming on didn't have a skill set that was needed. And so Christian Benimana started the African Design Center, which essentially was a 2-year training program for young graduates to give them all the skills they need to introduce them to a lot of different projects without necessarily putting the cost back on the project or back on the firm. And so it was a funded program, or partially funded program. It gave the firm a conduit of new employees, potential employees, but also gave these young professionals a lot of experience that they then either went to launch their own firm, work for Mass, or potentially jump into a different type of practice or academia. So I think those kinds of training programs at Mass were very instrumental in the last several years.
We have another question on this side. Hi, I wanted to talk about the technicality of the EMA primary school. What was your approach? Because I see when you with the before and after, the way you used like mud. I don't know what materials you used, but it was mud and fire bricks. I just wanted to understand. What was the like? Was this for a classroom or a place where people gather and like announce that okay, this is happening?
Yeah, I didn't.
That's very. And was it something that local or was it something that you had to study and read books about for you to produce something like this?
Yeah, so I think maybe try to get 2 questions. One was kind of about the arrangement of program and what we're seeing here, and then the second was materials and technique or knowledge.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
So first, I'll just kind of highlight here. Basically, there are 3 classrooms, small lab computer space, and then admin spaces. Really, really basic program. That photo I'm showing was kind of standing here, looking at that admin space. Or this reception admin space right here at the front. Main entrance, the site is coming from over here and entering in, and then there's a big kind of play area, assembly area outside. Like I was saying earlier, due to constraints, there's not an interior assembly area, but a lot of the kind of big gathering, early morning, parade ground type activities happen on this space outside. To your question about materials, it was a mix. So the Adobe Earth block, this is what masons have been using a long time. It's what everyone's building with. And we didn't want to do fire brick because it would mean burning more fuel in order to fire the bricks. We didn't want to bring in more cement. So we used these blocks. There were certain requirements we had in terms of like amount of drawing, size of them. We set up a standard, but they're really what everyone was using already. Nothing pretty phenomenal or exciting about that. The rendering was a clay rendering. Again, pretty standard. We did add some stabilizer and then oil to this to give it more resiliency to moisture penetration. So it was more moisture restricted or repellent. And then the wood shingle was something that was completely new. That had never been done, as far as I know, in this part of DRC. We had seen examples of it in Kivu, Goma area, but this technique I kind of showed, it was in that video, I guess. Fro is just a piece of steel which is driven through a wedge of wood in order to split it along the grain of the wood. That's a very, very, very old technology of making shingles and shakes. That tool was just made out of old leaf springs from the vehicle, and we found them close by and fabricated them, cut them up and sharpened them. So it was a really basic technique, and these guys figured it out pretty quick how to drive shingles. We can ask them.
No, nothing.
I think we have one more question at the back.
Well, how's that shingle roof doing now? I'm sure there's been more storms.
Yeah, it's a good question. I have not been there in a long time. I don't know exactly. From what I've heard, I have a good friend who works at the African Wildlife Foundation and has been there. And there's definitely bits of it which need to be replaced. That was the intention. I mean, you can see it's Padouk, which is a type of hardwood. It's naturally insect repellent or resistant, so there's no termite issues. But definitely some of these are going to blow and move, just like any tile or shingle roof. My house here, I've got to do maintenance and repairs on it here. So it's the same kind of regular maintenance. There was a school just down the road that was being built the same, or when I say just down the road, I mean about 30 kilometers down. It was being built out of concrete block and tin roofing. That school, I also don't know how it's faring, but if it rusts, there's nothing to do with that roof. If those blocks start failing, there's nothing to do. That was kind of the conundrum we were facing. Yeah.
And it's so interesting to think also use people like the workers are from the area, so like it's a skill generated for maintenance that the school needs instead of just like materials that you have to import or get everything's movable by the bicycle.
I'm aware of time.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm aware of time and that we've got. We should take it ending, but the person behind you actually had a question a long time ago, and there's another one here. So
I'm okay to keep going. Yeah, I'm here as a teacher. So I'm
okay.
Happy to answer more of that, and also on the website you can find more of that.
Come chat.
What stuck out to me, especially with this Lima project, was the site that we have is quite developed. It's in the city of residential. There's many
not like
speak
this.
about this traffic. It's really not like this, and I'm almost challenged to consider the idea of how a child is meant to be almost like in the space, protected in a way, kept in terms of safety. And when I look at this as context, how does the idea of surveillance get to be considered in such a space? Because you have a forest where it's a border, where there's monkeys and all of that. Do we have any considerations that are quite the contrast of what we're dealing with in an urban context like we do when it comes to surveillance specifically for children that you kind of implemented here as an exercise?
Yeah, you're saying this is a bit more of a porous project and allows kind of from open movement, whereas your project is a bit more constrained.
And we're thinking about surveillance all the time. And we're going, how do we keep kids safe?
Yeah.
And we're all sort of concerned, how do we not get a kid to run into the road or be taken by someone or something like that, which seems to be very different to this space, which is bleeding, it is open. So
is it something that the site already is it something that the site already offers and that's how people already use their original site?
It's a good question. I would say for this project, and I'm going to theorize for you as well, it's about boundaries, both visual boundaries and physical boundaries. And obviously, you can put up a wall, you can put up a fence, and that's kind of the most direct way you can do that. Or you can plant something, or you can create circulation which is inviting and attractive, or windows and views. So by drawing one's attention or one's movement in a certain direction, you're obviously going to deter the opposite. And so, I would say, like, as much as you can, doing these like simple little kind of silly parties and diagrams of like what you're trying to achieve and how the building itself can do that. This is, again, I love this diagram, but it is so simple. But like this is where so much of that school happens, in the middle. And yes, there's kind of these openings, but they're kind of secondary to this middle circulation where everyone comes through. So I'd say taking a program, thinking about how do you create some of those boundaries, some of those barriers, which both incentivize movement, play, exploration, or de-incentivize the opposite. And ensure, because yes, you're absolutely right, like security, protection, oversight is very important for that site. Yeah.
We technically should wrap now, but are you all okay with answering Cedric's question quickly? Everyone? Yeah? Cool. Awesome.
Hi. I'm just very curious about the post-construction situation that you could have. Being from such a massive firm, no pun intended. But what's your experience with what happens after you guys construct whatever school you do? The way the children interact, it could be in a way that you didn't really intend it to be. And how do you guys react to that? And has there been any changes to any projects that you guys did, or anything cool that you noticed after you constructed the project?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes and no. So there are definitely some things which I showed at the very end this Urbano school, which I didn't speak about, but that was kind of the first education project, the one on the last slide. And I remember that project opened and we had white walls on some of the classrooms. And maybe 2 weeks later, it was just like this line about this high appeared in all the white rooms of like just brown handprints of all the kids who have been playing outside. They come in, like run and put their hands all over the wall. And it's one of those unintended consequences of just like kids being in a space. There's now this like height, this datum line, which we then in later projects just started like painting in darker color up to a certain height, or like using a different material up to that height, because we just knew kids are going to run into walls, and that's fine. Let's allow that to happen, but let's think about maybe more a cleanable surface or something that doesn't show the dirt as much, or we just let it happen. We know that's going to happen. So there are definitely some little things like that that we have kind of like adapted to or changed. In terms of your question, like how the buildings have held up over time, is that what you're asking? Yeah. I mean, every building needs maintenance, needs care. I think, like I showed, one of the hardest things is play structure, like especially dynamic play structures. I really think play structures like with things with springs or swinging or spinning, those things can be super fun. They require maintenance and they have to be designed really well. There was the Mbuga project I showed you. There was a little pre-primary school down the road from it. And I remember an engineer had come in and designed like a merry-go-round for the playground. I think it's the gnarliest, like heaviest duty that like 3 people could sit on it. It was about the size of it's probably 4 meters by 4 meters. The thing was so robust. It was never going to fall apart. But also it felt very scary. It was just a really harsh thing. But this guy designed it so it would never fail. So there's a balance of how do we design something so it's going to last and hold on for a long time. But how do we design something that's really attractive and kids feel like they can go and use it. And so I think you need to kind of find those balances, because every building we exist in has to have some maintenance. And we need to plan for that. And just like these precedents I'm showing, we have to make sure we design for that when we can. At the same time, we need to recognize that kids are kids and they're going to run things, they're going to drop things, they're going to put their hands on walls, and that's great. But we just also have to plan for that as well.
And with that, I want to say thank you very much. It's been open to fielding any more questions afterwards. Andrew is right here. But I just want to say thank you so much for sharing with us, but all of this knowledge and all of your design thinking behind why you're doing what you're doing. I think that is exceptionally useful to all of us, but also to understand this model of making architecture at a time when we are thinking very much, what are we doing in the Anthropocene? What are we doing under the model of capitalism? What are we doing? And how do we make architecture within all of that is good design? And I really think that your firm and the way this works is an example of doing exactly that. Dealing with the challenges we're meant to be dealing with, trying to find solutions, trying to find transformation, but with real care. So thank you. Yeah.